I'm Yonit Levy of Channel 12 in Tel Aviv.
And I'm Jonathan Friedland of The Guardian in London.
And we are Unholy, two Jews on the news from Keshet Podcasts. Hi, Jonathan. Happy 2022.
We can't say Shana Tova. We've talked about that already. Yes, but happy 2022 to you. A new year, new possibilities, new beginnings.
Yes, New Year resolutions, which my resolutions basically don't get COVID. That's what I got, for this year.
Yeah, and I think it's true to say you have stuck faithfully to your resolution, right? I'm right about this. You haven't had it at all.
Not that I know of. No.
See, now I haven't had it at all as well. I think that's less of a big deal in my case because I'm not kind of out and about in the world quite as much as you are because you're anchoring the nightly news. You've even in the middle of COVID plus, you had to go into a workplace with other people because of the TV studio. I didn't have to do that.
Yes, so that I think I meet about 40 to 50 different people a day. I'm in a studio with my colleagues. Yeah, it is. And I have 3 children coming from different, kindergartens of schools. So I don't know. The statistic is quite staggering, but I have yet to encounter it, as far as I know, of course. So
I think that there's some kind of superhuman antibody thing going on with you there, because that is amazing. You never really did the lockdown withdrawing from the world thing that everyone else did, and yet there you are. So it's a kind of superpower.
You realize now after talking about this, next week I'm going to get COVID, just because we had this conversation, right? I mean, it's pretty obvious.
Of course. Our muzzle, you'll get it next week.
And it's your fault, just so we know where the blame is.
Yeah, that's on me.
We are a Jewish podcast. We need to know who's the guilty party. I know that I left you hanging last year, and I think that you are waiting anxiously to hear from me what the Hebrew word of the year is.
Yes, this was our cliffhanger. You tell me.
So I didn't tease it very well at the end of last episode. But every year at the end of December, the Academy of the Hebrew Language asks Israelis to pick their word of the year. By the way, it's a tradition at the end of December because that is the birthday of Eliezer ben Yehuda, who revived the Hebrew language. So this year, do you want to try and guess what the word of the year is?
Well, I was wondering if it was going to be some kind of COVID formulation, Omicron, or, some lateral flow.
Vaccine, boost, the Hebrew word for booster, et cetera. Et cetera.
And there is that kind of Hebrew thing where you just add atzia onto something and to make it boost, boosteratzia or something. So that's what I was wondering, if it was going to be something like that. No.
So it is related to COVID. And by the way, booster in Hebrew is dachaf. I just want you to say, because you were bad mathing on language. So no, the word is actually tirlul, which is sort of a slang word meaning something like bonkers, wackiness, lunacy, bananas, or bananas, as you would say it. It's really more of a slang word, but like sort of officially Israelis have chosen this to be their word of the year, basically saying all hell is breaking loose. It's pretty appropriate, I would say.
So that's so general all round now, but not balagan, right? We would distinguish tirlul from balagan.
Balagan is a more traditional word. It's already in the language quite officially. Tirlul is a word that, I love this interlude into the Hebrew language. This is a word that is slang. The root exists, right? We have the word metolal, which means crazy. That's been around for like 40 years. This is a newer version of that word.
And it's got a nice little echo, just the sound of it, with troll and trolling. Which is that accidental, or is there a little play on?
The Academy was very clear on saying that it does not have any connection to the word troll, but it does. I admit that it does echo it just a little bit.
So a detour within a detour. Again, we are Jewish people, so we can do this. The Academy in Israel plays the same protective role over Hebrew that, for example, the Académie Française plays protecting the French language from contamination from English. Is it as vigilant in protecting Hebrew?
It's extremely vigilant. And indeed, what it is doing is finding the Hebrew versions of words coming in from English. It's not, I think I don't want to say it's a lost cause, but it is something that they try to do. And while doing this, they try and incorporate these kind of words that are slang, but still Hebrew inside the language to make it, a language that's still...
Right, because my little joke before was that in a way there is this attempt sometimes to just Hebraicize basically every English word. So it's partner in the coalition, and it's high tech and startup and all this business.
Right.
Anyway,
so that's why I'm saying it's not a lost cause, but yeah.
No, I'm all for it. I was going to give you a little offering of a new coinage anyway on me. There's no academy that has ruled on this term and then hailed it as a new word. I have just in the last 48, 72 hours found myself reading and using a coinage I had never used before, namely Jew-goblin, which I hadn't expected to use. But thanks to Jon Stewart, former host of The Daily Show in the US, it has become part of the conversation. Everyone, I'm sure, will know what this relates to. It's the comments he made about the depiction of the goblin bankers in Gringotts, the bank vault or the big bank, in the Harry Potter books and films. And as an aside in his podcast, he just mentioned that when he first saw the film, he just thought, oh, right, Jew bankers. The little goblin struck him as looking like Jewish caricatures. And that then just ran, as things are prone to do in the electronic age and on social media. It morphed into, Jon Stewart accuses J.K. Rowling of anti-Semitism. Jon Stewart has absolutely said he's not doing anything of the kind. He doesn't think that at all. But it has touched off this whole debate about so-called Jew goblins, and various scholars of Norse mythology have been out there saying the notion actually of the goblin being associated with hoarding money predates anti-Semitism and medieval anti-Semitism. People have come back and said, okay, sure, but why in the book? Even before it was a film, in the very first book, does J.K. Rowling describe these goblins as swarthy and clever? Maybe was swarthiness part of the old Norse mythology, or is there a little weird anti-Semitic echo there? And then other people have come in and said, if you're thinking that when you read those words, then maybe you're the anti-Semite. Anyway, Jew-goblin has been a coinage that, as I say, in December 2021, I would not have predicted it. By January 2022, it's everywhere.
It's like you open Twitter app, you see Jew-goblin trending, you close Twitter, right? That's like their cue to, I don't want to deal with that anymore. I think we hear this whole discussion. The world is obviously not smarter in 2022. We just have to mention living in post-truth, whatever opinions. We have to say that J.K. Rowling has been very, very clear against anti-Semitism, a very vocal voice protecting the Jewish community. I think this needs to be said, even in this discussion of whether the movie or not, or the portrayal or not, seem to be in any way anti-Semitic.
Not only am I delighted and keen to agree with you on exactly that point, I think it's very relevant how the debate has played out, because in a way, it's a kind of borderline call about those words in the book and the film and everything. But, and I don't know whether this played a part in Jon Stewart walking back the remarks and stressing that he was not accusing her of it. But certainly in the way the debate has played out, there has been such a desire to give her the benefit of the doubt for exactly the reason you said, which is particularly here in Britain, when there was this issue about anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, not many public figures actually wanted to join in. A lot had the same attitude you had to opening up Twitter and seeing Jew-goblin. They thought, close that, let me have nothing to do with it. Very few public figures took the risk of getting involved and saying anything, and she was one of them. And she was absolutely clear, standing by Britain's Jewish community and Jews in general. And therefore people say, you know what, if there's even a weird thing in the film, and we'd rather it wasn't there, I'm sure it wasn't her doing, and there's no way this would have been this is any kind of black mark against her because of her overall record as being such a, as you say, friend and defend and sort of valiant defender of the Jewish community.
And here I also have to confess that I did not watch the films. I only read the books. And in the books, it didn't seem anti-Semitic to me. But enough of me being a nerd. Let's talk COVID. I think we should. No?
We always should. We always should. I mean, I think, as we've said, we've managed to somehow, both of you and me have avoided it in terms of physically contracting it. But we have not avoided it journalistically. It has been the only thing in our world, more or less, for the last, I was going to say years.
Not at all. And this is a tsunami, right? I mean, we're really seeing the tsunami of Omicron, right? New cases off the charts. Israel has 16,000 cases a day. I know that does not impress you. In the UK, there are about 16,000 new cases in 2 hours. So just to give you the kind of stats and the perspective, Israel has 840 daily new cases per million. You guys in the UK are way off in 2,700 new cases per million a day. United States somewhere in the middle. But it definitely means that we are in a different place than we were. Israel kind of shifting completely its policy and pivoting to a different strategy, saying we can't protect everyone anymore. We're going to protect the vulnerable. If you get the vaccine, you're protected. Get vaccinated. That is basically what the prime minister told Israeli citizens on Sunday.
I find this hugely interesting. As I've said many times before, Israel has extra salience in this argument because it was a sort of ahead of the curve at so many stages. Said it before, the whole business about embracing the booster. It was Israel that went out ahead in front on that. And now it is the go-to sort of fix that world leaders say, you hear Joe Biden all the time, get boosted, get boosted. That was the message from Israeli officials earlier. And therefore, if what you're saying is the new policy, I think people around the world are going to pay attention to that. And also, I think it may resonate with a lot of people. There is a rising fury and frustration, but I would say more fury at the unvaccinated. And there's a sense that, you've heard it from doctors on emergency wards in hospitals saying, all of my, in ITU beds are now taken up by the unvaccinated. And I cannot do my job because of these people who refuse to get the message. And that kind of more liberal, everyone can do their way, this is voluntary and it's an opt-in system, that there is impatience with that attitude. And I've heard people here say, because we have this National Health Service here, we shouldn't pay for treatment of people who are unvaccinated. That's never going to become policy, but you hear it as an indication of the anger. And I wonder if that's going to become, Israel will become if, the policy is pursued as it could be, whether Israel becomes a sort of model that people look to and say, you see, that's what we should be doing.
Remember at the beginning of the pandemic, we were talking about tracing and testing and isolation. That is a thing of the past. And it's a little bit, it sounds a little bit like Israel has given up. And I think that's really important. When we talk a year into our podcast, our very first episode was called Vaccination. We're talking about, and you said this, right? Israel was the trailblazer with the vaccines, with the booster. Now it's saying, basically, it's abdicating its trailblazer status and saying, I can't do this anymore. With these numbers and with this rate of infection, I can't contain this disease anymore. And it's a little bit like Israel is giving up. Right? The policy is sort of, we don't have a policy, or maybe like if, the famous Arabic idiom, right? Allah bab Allah. Whatever will be, will be. We did Arabic for the first time on the podcast. Right?
I think it reveals a big gap. We should be doing more of it. But tell me in practice what this would mean, because if you're saying abandoning that, does it mean that if somebody tests positive, and they're in school, say, or they're a student, they go to school the next day, and if you're vaccinated, don't worry about it. And if you're not, well, that's on you. And the person who's tested positive will no longer have to isolate and withdraw from society.
The person who tests positive will have to withdraw, but the testing will no longer be the very accurate PCRs, but will be the much less accurate rapid home testing in which you have to trust that the parents are doing it and they're rightfully, reporting back to what they found. So this is basically saying a lot of people and a lot of children are going to get infected because we don't have enough testing to do and enough sort of infrastructure to do all of this. I think that is a bit of a problem.
Yeah, no, we're already here at the Pretty Well the home testing, and I'm holding up onto our little Zoom camera here my home test kit just to show you tested negative just an hour or so ago.
I'm very glad since we're on Zoom.
Yeah, I know, because it wasn't you I was particularly worried about infection in this case, although what with technology being what it is. No, that stage of the rapid testing and moving away from PCRs, policymakers are moving towards that elsewhere. What I wondered, though, was whether what you've been describing in Israel is a sort of first sign, a straw in the wind that is indicating that actually eventually we may move to a policy of a shrug, of saying, you've got it, you know what, it's mild enough now that we can cope if you're vaccinated and boosted. So just continue. Keep the restaurants open, keep mixing, keep going on public transport, because if you're vaccinated, you'll handle it. It's mild enough now. If not, not. That's where I wonder if we're heading there.
Yeah, and let's say this is a risk, right? It's taking a risk, maybe because we don't have any other choice, but it still is a risk. We'll know in about 2 or 3 weeks for sure if that risk paid off or not. Now, I will want to mention this. You may have noticed Israelis are quite self-involved. But we need to mention this story, the fact that Israel was the first to close down its borders when Omicron was detected. This was 6 weeks ago, exactly November 26th on Friday. And it closed down its borders. Now, we have to, obviously this podcast is indicative of that. Israel and diaspora have a special relationship. And there are so many families here that are separated by geography. Part of the family lives in Israel. Part of the family lives in diaspora. You have endless cases of weddings and funerals and births. And, Israel can close its borders. It's a legitimate decision by a sovereign state. But if you close down the borders and you still have a Miss Universe pageant going on here, then it doesn't look good. And I chose those words carefully. And if you have no restrictions on Israelis at all, they have New Year's Eve parties, they're doing whatever they want. There were 10,000 people in a concert yesterday, and you don't let a mother visit her daughter who's about to give birth for the first time, you don't look good. And what I'm saying is that Israel, I think, failed in explaining its policy and maybe even apologizing to world diaspora and saying, we're sorry about this. This is what we're doing right now. Please be patient with us. There was no kind of message like that at all that came across.
Really striking you say that. I hadn't thought about the apology or communication. And isn't it interesting? It suggests that my expectations were so low, I didn't even anticipate there being one. But you're right, there could have been a conversation there from both sides, but from Israeli policymakers to say to the Jews of the world, look, we understand that this is painful and this is a loss. Mm-hmm. And you're absolutely right about every family. It's in my own family. My niece now lives in Israel. Her father has not been able to visit since she moved to Israel nearly 2 years ago. It's just not been able to happen. And there will be so many families where that is the case. And the worry you have is that this is okay. It's a short-term thing. It's just, when everything will get back to normal. What about for those people who are at a formative stage of their life where the relationship with Israel would be ordinarily forged? Mm-hmm. And what I'm thinking of is obviously those traditional trips that diaspora Jewish kids make when they're 16, when they've done, big exams and they have 4 or 5 weeks they spend in Israel. That didn't happen in 2020. I think it didn't happen again in 2021. And they're not going to be 16 again, those kids. And they won't be, then that is an experience they will just have missed. Even if they go later on, it won't be that kind of bond that is forged that, I know was a thing in just the lives of almost, everyone I know. And that's going to be, I just wonder if we may see the legacy of that, feel the legacy of that in decades to come, where there will be a generation who didn't cement that connection with Israel at that key formative stage of their lives.
I completely agree. And I think, again, look, this is something that Israel should have thought of, maybe found some sort of solution. But if you can't find a solution, at least find a way to explain it better. You see the Minister of Diaspora, Nachman Shai, writing, it's very urgent to allow for Jewish families to come in, even if the borders are closed. And some of the, and again, I'm the last person in the world that thinks that Twitter reactions are indicative of the whole society. But you see some of the responses to him saying, they want to come, they should make Aliyah, which is incredibly offensive and simplistic a way of looking at these things, right? We're a family. And there is a connection. People who love Israel, care about Israel, come and visit Israel. I'm looking at you, Jonathan Friedland. This is important for the relationship. When you have a story like I don't know if you heard of this at all. And by the way, it didn't make a lot of headlines in Israel either. It made a lot of headlines in South Africa. But the day they closed the borders, family and friends of Ali K, who's a Ole from South Africa, who was murdered in a terror attack, came to mourn with his family, and they were turned back. They were turned back during Saturday. Some of them were Sabbath observers. And again, no direct explanation. The prime minister could have recorded this sort of video and saying he's sorry. I think it's a big problem. And as you say, I think it will resonate for a long time. And as an Israeli, I really regret that.
That thing you say when we're a family, I think it's a useful way of thinking.
Sometimes
about
dysfunctional.
it.
Sometimes.
Yeah, no, because the reason why family works is exactly you don't always get on easily, but you are bound up with each other's lives, and it just reminds me of something which I know that people in diaspora said in order to explain the connection Jews feel towards Israel. They said this to non-Jews by way of explanation, but I now wonder if it would be useful as a thing that Jews say to Israelis, which is one way of putting it is Israel is the largest Jewish community in the world. We often don't say that most basic thing because it's a country and a state, but it's also just the largest Jewish community in the world. Yeah. Jews are a people spread around the world, and if they are cut off from the single biggest Jewish community, that has an effect. Love it or hate it, enthusiast or opponent. It's just a living, breathing, organism, and it is cut off from its, beating heart. And that is just going to have an effect, whether or not, as I say, you're a supporter or an opponent. So this is something COVID has done, but I think you're right. Maybe it was unavoidable. I think your point about the inconsistency with, yes to Miss Universe, no to the relative, the mother of the pregnant daughter, I think that's very well made, that point. But even if it had to be done, that decision, explain it, talk about it. And one of the things we've talked about here is there isn't really that channel of communication, and it's partly why we found ourselves doing this is there aren't that many places where Jews and Israelis and Jews and Israeli Jews are in conversation with each other regularly. But it would have been very good. Maybe that would be one for Isaac Herzog, who we know is an unholy listener, president of the State of Israel. Maybe that's the sort of thing he could have said from his platform.
He tried. But again, I think it was maybe a little too little and too late. In Israel, we say, Al tiyeh tzodek tiyeh chacham, don't be right, be smart. It's not about being right. It's not even about being smart. Just be kind, I think is the point. And now, in the spirit of being kind, what would you like to talk about, Jonathan?
Well, we've had you talking about you, so why don't I talk about you? No,
okay,
let's
do that.
It's a bit like that. No, because there was something that interested me, and I'd love to hear more from you on it. And that is this meeting that happened. I know this week, Israeli minister, party leader of the Blue and White Party, Benny Gantz, was in Jordan for a meeting with King Abdullah, and there's some things to deconstruct there because he's not the foreign minister. And so it's quite interesting that he had that mission. But the bit that interests me is rather earlier, and maybe the two are related, Benny Gantz has had a series of meetings with the Palestinian leader, Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority and of the PLO, chairman of the PLO. They met, I think they even met in Benny Gantz's home. Look, I know this isn't, automatically top of the news in Israel all the time, this stuff, and for reasons we might talk about. But what is going on there? Because for reasons which we may come on to, I think people outside Israel, perhaps even more than inside, are interested in this.
Yeah, well, first of all, it was news in Israel, but more because of politics than because of diplomacy and peace. But I will get to the politics in a minute. Yes, so as you said, Benny Gantz, the security defense minister and head of the Blue and White Party, met with Mahmoud Abbas in his own home, in Benny Gantz's home in Rosh Hashanah. This has not happened in a decade. The last Israeli politician who had Mahmoud Abbas visit his house is, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu in 2010. So over a decade, they discussed civil matters, right? VIP permits and tax revenues. Bennett, the prime minister, prefers the issues talking about the civic progress to discussing diplomatic progress. But I think what's also interesting here, beside these conversations, that are very important because Israel has an interest in the Palestinian Authority being strong and vibrant, is also the politics. So should I get into the politics, or do you want to talk diplomacy first?
Well, just on the diplomacy, it doesn't surprise me that in a way it wasn't that big substantively. And I have to say the interest abroad was not particularly great. There wasn't much coverage of any of these meetings. That's partly because everyone around the world, I think now, is in the era of COVID, is so inward looking. I think foreign news in general has had less salience because people have been very fixated on their own affairs. But before the pandemic, when you talked about Israel, the only issue that got coverage really was the Israeli-Palestinian track, that question, a bit about Iran, obviously, but that, is seen to be the existential question. And it is why, and again, I know from our conversations, this is not the case inside Israel, but it is why, for example, people around the world, and of course I'm broadly generalizing, there are exceptions, but a lot of world opinion was quite keen to see the back of Bibi Netanyahu because they thought he was an obstacle to dialogue and to peace. And so people who really knew nothing about Naftali Bennett's history and his positions on settlements and so on, just thought, oh, good, they've got a new guy there. Now, maybe there'll be, and I'm using the phrase deliberately naively, oh, maybe this will restart the peace process. Even though, of course, people who know all about this know there is no peace process and there hasn't been for a long time. But there was this assumption that, oh, if there's a change in government, they must have thrown Netanyahu out because he's done nothing on the peace process and now it will restart. Now, that's obviously, you and I know that's very naive. It's not like that. But when there is a bit of movement, it's interesting. And so the fact they were in each other's house, or in Benny Gantz's house, that they had that meeting, at least, is there some hope, even a tiny hope, that at least there is, to use that phrase from peacemaking, a political horizon. There is some form of channel of conversation, even if that political horizon is actually a mirage. Is there some relief at all that at least they're talking?
What's the answer you want to hear?
Tell me the truth. I've got to be
lie to me, Yonit. Just lie to me. Look, officially, right? This government, the Bennett-Lapid government, will not make any progress towards a Palestinian state, right? They have their mutual vetoes. Bennett, as long as he's prime minister, won't. Lapid, officially, even when he's prime minister, is not supposed to. But after saying all that, first of all, what is very important for this prime minister is civic progress, is economic progress for the Palestinians. And I will remind you that when we talked to Yuval Noah Harari a few episodes back, and remember one of the insights in his book is what usually happens in history is what you least expect. I would say this is somehow still in the horizon. I wouldn't say it's only a mirage. Remember also Ben Rhodes saying, I prefer someone on the right who's telling the truth, and then we can have an honest discussion about what the future is, than someone who's hiding his true opinions. I'm not sure I answered your question, but I will go on to saying something about the politics of what is going on here. What is going on here politically is that Benny Gantz is carving his own niche, right? You said it's not the foreign minister, it's not even the prime minister, it's the defense minister meeting with the head of the Palestinian Authority or the King of Jordan. And he's trying to sort of wink at the center left in Israel, saying, I am the person who will be your Yitzhak Rabin, right? That is what he's saying. And the more Bennett is moving to the center, he is trying to get the left part of his coalition. That is also what is going on here.
No, I get that completely. And the idea that, of course, it's politicking, and Gantz's brand, in a way, was to be the Rabin of our time, meaning the general turned peacemaker politician. So I get all that. And nevertheless, I find myself, you've been quoting various Arabic proverbs. I find myself quoting the text of Dumb and Dumber to you, in which Jim Carrey tells the love interest, do you think there's any prospect of you and me getting together? And she looks at him and goes, I would say it was 1,000,000 to 1. And he looks at her and goes, so you're telling me there's a chance? And that's what I feel like. I'm clinging to the optimism.
You're quoting Dumb and Dumber. There's no other peak I can go in this podcast. I think we have to stop. I can't. This is
but while I'm in the realm of clutching at tiny straws, I did also notice this decision by the government of suspending settlement activity in the so-called E1 corridor. Again, that's the sort of thing you probably would not have got a statement to that effect from the alternative government that was on offer. Look, these are crumbs of comfort for those of us who would like to see these two peoples living side by side, two states side by side. I'm very ready for people to tell me I'm deluded and this is not going to happen. Indeed, I have on my desk the memoir from Shlomo Ben-Ami, who, of course, was Israel's foreign minister, and the book is Prophets Without Honor, but the subtitle is The 2000 Camp David Summit and the End of the Two-State Solution. So he's saying it's over, let it go. This book is coming in 2022, but I like your Yuval Noah Harari and Dumb and Dumber point. You never quite know. I think we have some
a
awards
range.
to...
We have a range. Oh, I just wanted to mention one more thing, too, because I think it helps to understand this political situation that the prime minister is in when you're searching for him to do things like the E1. There is, Naftali Bennett is under a lot of pressure. The Netanyahu supporters pushing him and calling him like the worst, you're a traitor, you stole the elections, etc. Still doing this 7 months after he became prime minister. Yesterday, he completely lost it in the Knesset. Pictures we have never seen of the prime minister going to the benches of the opposition, yelling at the Likud MKs. This is the situation he is in. And I think it's important to understand when we expect him to do all kinds of different things towards peace. This is where he is. And I think we kind of need to also remember that in all of our conversations. But yes, let's indeed dole out awards. Jonathan, would you like to begin?
Just before I go on to that, and by the way, I don't expect him, but I'm just hope and expectation are very different things. But just tell me why he was losing it. What? By the way, I think that feels to me like a sort of rite of passage for Israeli prime ministers. We've all seen pictures of whether it was Netanyahu or Perez or whatever, shouting at fellow members of the Knesset from the podium. So that feels to me like he's becoming a real prime minister. But explain to me what triggered him.
Well, there's an argument about the electricity law. It's a law that ensures illegal structures to be connected to the power grid, and it benefits basically Arab communities. The Likud members of parliament kind of started yelling at him that it's a shame. And as if they were in an episode of Game of Thrones, they kept yelling shame, shame, shame at him. And again, this comes on the coattails of 7 months of them calling him a traitor because he became prime minister with 6 seats. The problem for them is not that he became prime minister with 6 seats, but that he became prime minister and Netanyahu isn't. And they kept, they call him a traitor. They call him a person who stole the elections. He was just, I think, really, he kind of lost it. And he came and he started yelling at them. He had to there were ushers of the Knesset kind of separating in this argument. It was really, even in the standards of the very chaotic Israeli parliament, those were pictures we haven't seen. So that is where he is.
So we have some awards to hand out. Chutzpah and Mensch is what we do. I'm going to try and hog both here because I think there's one person who could be, we've never done this before, a simultaneous winner of both at once, and that is the former rabbi for the Chabad community in Poway in San Diego, Rabbi Yisrael Goldstein. Obviously Mensch, because he was something of a hero when that synagogue came under fire in what turned out to be a deadly shooting in 2019. He was hailed as something of a hero afterwards and went to the White House and met the president and even spoke at the UN, Rabbi Yisrael Goldstein. In this week, he has been sentenced to 14 months in prison for tax and wire fraud for a whole series of financial crimes, which the presiding judge said dragged down many congregants, all for his own personal benefit. So he has gone from Mensch to really beyond chutzpah in just a matter of a couple of years. And so he has a claim, Rabbi Yisrael Goldstein, to be a double award winner.
So I'm going to, you hogged both the Mensch and chutzpah, but I'm going to give a Mensch award anyway, just if I can, if I may. We have to this week give a Mensch award to Betty White, who died,
of course,
I think 3 weeks less even short of her 100th birthday. She was going to be 100 in January 17th. Such a prolific career, such a pillar of American comedy and sitcom, as someone who managed to kind of reinvent herself constantly, which is very hard to do in Hollywood and with the ageism, especially ageism targeted against women. I just think she was an awesome lady, and I'm definitely not alone in this. And since we were talking so much about Mideast peace, we have to play this clip that actually Martin Indyk found on Twitter, which is Golden Girls' version of peace in the Middle East. And of course, Betty White herself participating in this. Let's listen in for a sec.
At 2 a.m, waiting for George to come home, I called a radio talk show. I gave them the solution to the crisis in the Middle East. Giving the Palestinians Greenland? I didn't know that was you. You were great.
giving the Palestinians Greenland?
It's a big place. Nobody uses it.
We do not on this podcast endorse giving the Palestinians Greenland. This was just a joke.
We don't. And Martin Indyk, I remember he resurrected this when there was this story about Donald Trump wanting to see if he could buy Greenland. And Indyk rather brilliantly suggested maybe this is what Donald Trump has in mind.
And he canceled the meeting with Denmark because they wouldn't sell Greenland to him. Remember that? Good times.
I mean, it's so you sometimes wonder if you just dreamed it. But how brilliant that Betty White was there first with that rather, look, which is more likely? You know, Yuval Noah Harari's idea, it's the thing you don't expect to happen. Which is more likely? My hope that somehow, you know, the Benny Gantz thing leads to some Middle East talks, or the Betty White plan. And, you know, there's as much Tirlul in both. But there's Tirlul to go round with this, the craziness of all of this.
Can we just make the point that this series was called, in the mid-'80s, The Golden Girls? 3 out of the 4 main characters were playing women in their 50s. This was called The Golden Girls. This would never happen today. At least in that regard, we kind of advanced as a species, don't you think?
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, what would happen today is that people would say the word girls is demeaning, and we just call it golden people of a, you know, opposite but equal.
But also gender. The idea they in their 50s, I think they were played as if they were terribly elderly, and I'm not sure. Possibly I'm saying this because I'm in my 50s.
We just call it Sex in the City or whatever the remake is. I can't believe they called it Golden Girls. Unbelievable. Shame on you.
So we've gone from Dumb and Dumber to the Golden Girls via Yuval Noah Harari and Shlomo
I've
Ben
taken
Ami.
you down. I wanted you to stop being this British intellectual and start quoting Jim Carrey. This is what I wanted to happen.
We are nothing if not eclectic on Unholy. If you have enjoyed everything you've heard, do tell your friends. Give us a review or a rating. Lots of you are doing that, which is all good. On Instagram, we are @2Jews. And I'm hoping you are a subscriber, Yonit. If not you, who?
That would be kind of embarrassing if I wasn't. I will say thank you to Lior Friedman, REP, Rom Atik, head of podcast, Omer Primat, and Irad Esher for original music. And you and I shall meet next week. Jonathan, let's be optimistic at least about that.
We shall, and I look forward to it. Yeah, negative test in hand. See you then.